Welcome to the session on effective presentation skills. I'm Dr. Rovina from the Center of Training and Placement. Today's session is going to talk about presentation and its importance for interviews. How well we present ourselves and our presentation during an interview is very, very important. In fact, presentation is considered to be one of the most sorted rounds in interview. When we look at an interview process, we have different rounds of interviews, starting from the verbal ability to a GD, and then of course we have a presentation. A presentation can be considered to be a self-introduction in the form of a self-introduction or a presentation. In general terms, a presentation is a means of communication which is exclusively meant to inform, share, explain, and present a point of view. It could be talking to a group of people or addressing a team or maybe presenting some kind of statistics in a meeting. Let's look at some of the flaws in our presentations. Most of the time we fail in our presentation because of certain areas. When we look at our experience, it is not necessary that we have to have a lot of experience in presenting ourselves or presenting our information, but at least having an understanding of how a presentation is done is very important. So let's look at one aspect as being the flaw in presentation is experience. We then move on to enthusiasm. At times, our enthusiasm, the way we present our information, has a lot of effect on the presentation. If we do not have enthusiasm, then the presentation might just fall flat and even make the entire audience very boring. Then we move on to practice. We need to practice a lot. Some of us are very self-confident at times and assume that we would be able to do a perfect presentation without practice. But however or how many times we practice, there is some lack of, there is some kind of deficit during the presentation. So a lot of practice is required when we are going to present our information. We also come across lack of related material. At times we do not have the related material in our presentation. Surprisingly, most of the time many presentations have a lot of flaws because of this aspect. So make sure that you have the related material to your presentation and it has a meaning which needs to be presented. Then of course we move on to confidence. We might be very, very technically sound, or we might have all the content, we might have a fabulous PowerPoint presentation, but then if we do not have the confidence, we would not be able to do a proper presentation. Hesitation is another aspect which needs to be looked upon. We often have a lot of hesitation even when we are presenting our ideas or presenting our content. So there should not be any kind of hesitation. If you have started the presentation, make sure that you complete it in one tone and you do not have any kind of inhibitions while presenting. Whatever information you have needs to be presented with the same kind of flow. Then we move on to the ambiguity in the results that you want to conclude. Sometimes there is some kind of difference in the conclusion that is required or that is necessary to be made at the end of the presentation. But then there is a lot of difference in what the presentation is actually about. So when we look at the flaws of the presentation and when we look at our presentation, we should understand that this entire effectiveness of presenting your information depends a lot on the audience. Your audience should feel captivated and not captive. Remember that you are not there to make your audience listen to what you have to say rather than focus on what your audience needs to know. Many a times it happens that we convey what we want to convey and not looking at the audience point of view. So when you are preparing your presentation, make sure that your audience is kept in mind. The point of view is also from the audience point of view. A lot depends upon the excitement and the tone that we are presenting ourselves, especially during our presentations. So if you're excited about what you say, your audience too will react in a similar way. In the sense, suppose if you carry a tone of being very, very submissive or being very, very flat, then the audience reaction will also be very flat and they will also respond in a similar way. So the excitement, as I mentioned to you in my previous slide, the excitement and the enthusiasm while presenting a point of view or while presenting information is very important. That comes down to the tone and the manner in which you present yourself. As said earlier, it makes a lot of difference in the presentation and also on the effect that the audience will have. Let's move on to what can be an effective presentation. When we talk about having an effective presentation or conducting a presentation which is flawless, which is very, very successful, which is very impactful, what should be some of the key components in the presentation? Content. First of all, let's look at the content. Content should be very clear, in the sense you should not have something which has too much of information or which has no clarity in the idea which is going to be conveyed. It can be simple. The presentation can be very simple, kept at a very simple note, yet have a powerful and impactful meaning which can convey whatever you want to convey. Remember that the presentation has to be progressive, in the sense you cannot be deviating from the subject too much, or you cannot be sticking on with one particular point for a long time. You need to progress as you go ahead with your presentation. It has to have some kind of sequence. So having a sequence during your presentation has a lot of impact on the audience and on your presentation as well. You should also learn to be very consistent in the sense in your topic and in your tone as well. So when you have a very high tone suddenly in between your presentation, or when you're having a high pitched tone with a lot of enthusiasm at the beginning of the presentation and then you eventually slow down, has a lot of effects on the slide. So make sure that your progression and the consistency remain at a balance. Now let's look at design. The design should be captivating. Doesn't mean to say you should have an art gallery in your slides. It doesn't mean that you have a lot of design, new design, very confusing designs in your slides. Remember, design should be planned according to the presentation and the type of presentation that you are doing. Let's move on to the delivery part of it. The delivery, the mode of delivery should be planned prior and then decide on the kind of text and the audience. So when you look at delivery, the mode of delivery and the audience have to be kept in mind and planned. Intonation and voice modulation should also be considered. As mentioned earlier, when we look at the intonation and voice, it has to be at one pace. It cannot be high and it cannot continue to be high for a long time. If we want to add a lot of feelings to the presentation, if we want to add a lot of emotion to the presentation, then we have to decide which particular slide needs that kind of effect or needs that kind of intonation and voice. Adding emotion to a presentation makes a lot of difference, because when the presenter is having emotion and wants to display a very strong point of view, using intonation and voice can be very beneficial. Now let's look at some aspects of paying attention to our designs. Remember, as I told you earlier, it should be simple, less, it should contain less points per slides. It should also contain less font styles and less colors. Make sure that your styles are very minimal and your colors are very sober. The best point would be to use a matchup of colors where you have a lot of pastel shades, very light colors to the eye, and then the font matches the color. So when you are planning your presentation, you could take any slide and add a lot of colors and text, and first decide which font or which color would really match with the kind of presentation you're doing. If you're looking at a very sensitive topic during your presentation, it's best to stick with light colors. If there is a lot of enthusiasm, it is also advised to use a lot of peppy colors, but at the same time maintaining that minimum color. It should have very light effect. It should be appealing and not a strain to the eye. It should not be a strain to the eye, because remember, the mode of delivery can either be online, or it can be podium, or it can be using a projector. So when we use a projector, the colors tend to be a lot more brighter. So make sure that during your presentation, the choice of colors that you make should be decided well upon in advance. Try not to use clip arts, though it is encouraged at times. Clip arts can be disturbing, can convey a wrong meaning at times. So clip arts can be decided on the content. It's left up to the presenter and the kind of audience that you are getting. But you have to understand that the clip art has to make sense in the presentation. Appearance does matter. Our body language plays a lot of role in the way we are going to present ourselves. So you should be able to dress for the event. Understand your audience well in advance, because the kind of audience you are going to present has to be um, informed to you, or you need to be informed about the audience well in advance. Wear comfortable shoes to weigh your feet evenly. When you do a podium presentation, when you want to present while you are standing, a lot matters on the kind of shoes that you wear. You don't want to be wearing on shoes that are noisy. You don't want to be wearing on shoes that are uncomfortable. So make sure that you wear on comfortable shoes so that you can balance out your weight. You can be able to move around during the presentation. Allow yourself to move a bit. We all have that idea in our mind saying that when you do a presentation, you have to stand upright. There is no ground rule for presentation. It is the kind of the comfort that we develop eventually during our presentation, and the way we are able to project ourselves during the presentation. A lot of us have a butterflies. We are all very nervous during our presentation. You might be the most confident of presenters, but then when it comes to presentations in front of your audience, there is some bit of nervousness. Look confident. The best way to do it is focus on your audience. Don't focus on a particular person, or don't focus on a particular side of the audience. Make sure that you look at everybody. Eye contact is very essential when it comes to presentations. Taking that point, let's look at our body language. As I mentioned earlier, just as how important intonation and voice is, in a similar way, facial expression also makes a lot of difference. Now, when we look at facial expressions, we can add a little bit of smile. We can be pleasant during our presentation, but not be too casual. Remember, presentations, when you are presenting in front of an audience, you need to balance your facial expressions. It cannot be a too serious look, or it cannot be a too casual look. So wear a smile whenever it is necessary. Look interested, keep that enthusiasm on. When you have that enthusiasm, it automatically reflects on your facial expression. As I mentioned, eye contact is another essential aspect. We cannot be focusing on one particular person or one particular side. Rather, our eye contact has to be balanced. It has to be on all the sides of the audience and all the sides of wherever the audience is seated. If it is online, then you have to look into the camera, wear that smile and look very, very confident. Our body movement, some of us have an expression of using hand gestures, and some of us have the habit of moving around. The best way to understand what is our body movement is practice once in front of the mirror. Try recording your presentation and watch how your body movement matches with your presentation. That is one way you would be able to justify the right kind of body movement, hand gestures, and also be able to look into the camera and speak very confidently. Let's look at our appearance. It's always best to wear very pleasant clothes. Make sure that our hair is set and we are very confident in our appearance. Sometimes having the wrong hairstyle or probably having um, not a very confident dress code can make you a little pull down during your presentation. So appearance really matters. Now, when we look at the physical appearance, it does a lot because you are going to convey the kind of information your audience wants to hear. So when you are projecting this kind of information, appearance makes a lot of impact during the presentation and for the audience. Maintain a calm exterior and look interested. So as I said, the physical appearance needs to be taken into consideration, and also look at the kind of confidence you are going to have within yourself. That is, you need to look interested and maintain a very, very calm exterior. Work on the structure well in advance. Don't wait for the last minute. Remember, the presentation can be done in this order. This is not necessarily to be followed. Each one of us has our own style and our own structure. However, this is one way you can project your presentation. You need to have an objective. You need to have an introduction for the presentation. Then, of course, we come to the main content. We have a summary, a sum up of all the slides that has been said, or a sum up of all the content that is in the presentation. Then, of course, we have a conclusion, and then comes the recommendation. Now, this last part can be done very interactively. Keeping your audience, you can go ahead with some of the summary, trying to make it interactive as possible. Look at the conclusion, ask the audience, draw some opinion from the audience, make them involved. So in that way, you have a variety of conclusion that you want to give and what the audience has understood. Recommendation, it's left up to you as to how you want your recommendations to go. Some of us can draw the recommendation from the audience. Some of us like to give the recommendations. However, whatever style suits you, you can go ahead with the kind of structure that is presented here. The last is always left for question and answers and a feedback section. So make sure that we have this component also in your presentation. As I mentioned to you, you need to practice before you make it. And the more number of practice or the number of times you practice, you get more and more perfect with it. So let's look at some of the points that we need to keep in mind before we really face our presentation. Rehearse all points and you prepare yourself. Rehearse with visual aids and handouts if any. Many a time there is a lot of confusion. A lot of presentations require some kind of visual aids and handouts. So when we are on a particular slide and if we have handouts or if we have a visual aid that we need to present, make sure they both coincide, because the slide cannot say something and you cannot be presenting a handout to the audience on another topic. So make sure that you rehearse before the presentation. Practice and again for time management. Remember, each slide has to have that equal attention. You cannot skip slides, or if even if you want to skip slides, you have to understand what kind of slides require that importance and what slides do not require that importance. Rehearse in front of a mirror or a friend. That's the best way you can make your presentation successful. The mirror, you mirror yourself. The more you mirror yourself, the more uh, perfect you become, the more you analyze your body language. A friend, a friend is also uh, advisable to take suggestions from, but then remember that mirroring yourself is more impactful, and looking at a friend's suggestion can also be considered. So let's look at our conclusion. As I mentioned to you, the more you prepare and the more you practice, the more successful your presentation is. Channelize your fear. You should be able to balance your fear factor or balance your inhibitions well in advance before the actual day of the presentation. Try this. You could probably have a small crowd seated in front of you, or try to do an online presentation among your friends or classmates or among your team members 1 day or 2 days before the main presentation. In that way, you will be able to understand where your fear is, whether it is while delivering the content, whether it is looking at people and talking, whether it is in the kind of sequential way that you want to present the presentation, whether you are having a problem in understanding the sequence of the presentation. The best way to overcome all these fears on the day of the presentation or before the presentation is interaction. Interaction with your audience is very essential. So what you could do is, as you are in with your slides or as you're in between your slides, give it a pause. Try to interact with your audience. Try to get their point of view. Do a fun activity. It's nice to do an activity in between slides so that you really maintain that the kind of interest that was there in the beginning. Because presentation is one aspect where you are in command of the entire topic. So with that, I conclude my session on the effectiveness of presentation for interviews. Thank you so much.